Do you guys want to hear a scary story? If you've been following me for a while, you know my lore is I tell a lot of very true scary stories based on a house I used to babysit for. There are two girls in this home named Luna and Aura. Well, that's what I call them. They're fake names for their own privacy. Luna is actually growing up very fast now, and I got in contact with her about the hauntings, and she found my TikTok, and she saw my most recent TikTok talking about the time I had sleep paralysis in their home. And she gave me a story to tell you guys of her own sleep paralysis experience she had the most recently. So Luna said that she was staying the night at a friend's house, and this happened to her about a year ago. And she was staying at a friend's house, and they were having fun, like everything was normal, everything was fine, nothing out of the ordinary. She said she had very few experiences since her family moved out of the house. She said there were less and less experiences over time. She started going to church, and she started finding herself, She said they definitely went down, and she didn't see Pete, her imaginary friend, really much at all. But this specific time, she was staying at a friend's house, and she said they were playing games and watching movies, just young teenage girl stuff, right? And she told me she had actually had sleep paralysis before. Like, she's had it before, but this was one of her scariest times that she remembers. So she said they all finally fell asleep. She said that they were watching Confessions of a Shopaholic. I don't know if anyone remembers that movie. I was kind of surprised when she told me that, because it's like, that movie came out when I was still a kid. I think it was like 2008, 2009. Anyways, regardless of the story, they fell asleep watching that movie. And she wakes up at some point, right? Like, everyone fell asleep, and she said that she heard a very jarring sound, and it sounded like very strong, prominent white noise. And she went to look around, and she realized she couldn't move, but her eyes were open. So she looks over at the TV, and it is just a black screen, like the TV's off, right? But there's white noise playing from it, like extremely loud. She said it was extremely abnormal. Like, there's no way the other girls would have slept through this because it was so loud. And she was confused on what was happening. She didn't know what time it was. She didn't know why she couldn't move. She didn't know why her friends weren't waking up too. Then she said a small light comes on, like from the way she described it to me, basically. Like, she's, laying down, TV's in front of her. And then from behind her, a light turns on. From that light turning on, she can now see a slight reflection in the TV. And she said she saw the reflection of something standing right behind her. And she started to hear something growling. And this is kind of mentioned in one of my story times. I don't know if you remember this, guys. The imaginary friend, the demon they saw her, used to drool on her. I witnessed this happen to her one time, would drool on her hand out of nowhere. And it was definitely saliva. And it was no one else's, it wasn't hers, it wasn't anybody's. So this was a common thing this poor girl went through. This demon used to salivate for her. And she said, all of a sudden, she's looking up, and she sees this thing, the shadow of it coming closer. So she closes her eyes, and then she just hears a bunch of weird sounds in her ear. And she feels something wet hit her forehead. And then she heard a really, really deep laugh. She said at this point she starts freaking out. She didn't want to open her eyes back up. She was terrified. She knew she was having sleep paralysis. God, poor girl, she's so young. And so young still. Anyways, I guess she finally breaks out of it. And when she's screaming, and she actually wakes up, her friends are standing over her, and they're very confused. And Confessions of a Shopaholic was still on. So I don't know if this was a lucid dream. I don't know what it was, but oh my God. She said she felt like she blacked out and went to an alternate universe. She asked for everybody's opinions on this. So if anyone has opinions, drop them below. She'll be reading the comments. So be nice to this girl. I swear to God. You better be nice to Luna. I'm crazy. I still try to protect this girl with all of my heart, so be nice. But that is a scary story for the day. What do you guys think? Bye.
Listen, we don't get scared and we don't judge. Let me tell you guys the story time of this family that moved into a haunted house. To give you guys context on this haunted house, obviously it didn't start off as a haunted house. At first, they lived a woman, a man, and their child, right? The man died, and I think the child was old enough at this point to work for themselves. I don't know if the child is a male or female. They left a very long time ago, right? They went to go live in a town nearby us, right? Sharp. They left this house unoccupied for so long. right? So the husband died, isn't it? And the wife sprinkled ashes of the husband inside of the house so that nobody steals, nobody tries, nothing. We were so scared of that house. Growing up, we used to play at that house because there is no gate, right? There is no gate, and you can get on top of the roof, you can play outside, go inside, because we were scared. We were scared to even peek inside the house because people used to say that the house is haunted, right? And even when you try to peek, like, you just get chills and you're just like, nah. And also the house was also very clean because the mom, the wife of the deceased used to come and clean the house, whatever. And there was also light inside the house sometimes, and people obviously thought, maybe it was haunted because of that, which I don't know. So okay, on this particular day, we're used to this house not having people. Like, it's been unoccupied for years, right? This family's moving in. We're like, cool, there's a girl there that's like our age, and we're like, hey, we're gonna have a new friend. We go to the girl and we're like, hey, because she used to stand on the gates and she was bored. We're like, hey, do you want to be our friend? She was like, yeah, sure, like, I'd love to be your guys' friend. We play with her, whatever, we talk to her, it's cool, it's chilled, it's nice. So she tells us the story of how they moved here. She's like, have you guys ever seen people live in this house? We're like, not really. Why? Well, she's like, they had been looking for a house to rent or a room to rent. Okay, they couldn't rent a room because, they were kind of like, it was like, I think 2 kids and the mom and the dad. It was just going to be too much, right? They had been looking for a place to rent for a really long time, and unfortunately they couldn't find it. And then they found this man who told them, no man, that house is up for rent, is up for rent or whatever, you guys can go stay there. And they went to go stay there, but they don't sleep at night. Things go missing. Like, you will go to bed, charge your phone, leave it right next to you on top of the table, and you will find it gone. You're gonna search for it, and then you're gonna find it under the couch. How did it get there? Like, things are going missing. Spoons, she said that cutlery went missing. Sometimes food in the house would go missing. Like, you guys would buy a whole month's groceries and it would like deplete before the end of the week, and they're like, they think that they're living with something here. It all of a sudden got worse because they started hearing footsteps inside the house. Like, when they're sleeping, they hear footsteps, and obviously they were all too scared to So she told us that they were all too scared to go check whatever. And I think the parents were the ones that went to check. They're not sure. And then they eventually started hearing knocks on the windows, but it was really faint. It was not really loud, not really scary, but it was scary, but not as scary as a loud knock. They started hearing walks on the roof, on the floor. It was crazy. Sometimes the TV would turn on its own. And they eventually went to a traditional healer to find out what's happening, whatever. And when they got to the traditional healer was like, there is a ghost in that house. The owner of the house is the one that doesn't want you guys there. Do you get what I'm trying to say? And the only reason is that the wife is actually, it's not the wife who's renting this house out. The wife is very old. So obviously the child now is the one that's renting that house out. And the owner of the house doesn't want people to rent there, doesn't want people to buy that house because the wife doesn't want. Even in death, the man is still protecting his wife, right? And the rent over there of the rent for that house was very, very low. That's why they also chose that house, because it was very cheap. Kanti, it's cheap because nobody wants to rent it. So the guy was like, listen, you guys have to make a little shrine and ask the person of that house the surname of you guys need to find out the surname and do X, Y, and Z. So they called the child, right? And they told the child what's happening. They told the child what they did, and the child was like, it's fine. The child gave the people the child gave the people who were renting his or her surname. Like I said, I don't know the gender of the child. So they used the surname. They asked to stay there, whatever. And she's like, the sound stopped, but they stopped for a while and then they started again. But it's not as bad as it used to be. And it's like 2 years later and they're still living there. And I don't understand why they're still living there if you guys are hearing things. Do you get what I'm trying to say? What would you guys do in this situation other than moving? Because the family is still there. They haven't moved. I would honestly just suggest you guys find another place that's low rent as well. Because it's no use living somewhere and you guys are living in fear. Every single time the clock hits 12 a.m., you guys are scared. Oh, okay, that's no way to live. things are going missing in the house. Like, and mind you, she told me that they also have to go to the Sangoma like every 3 months so that the Sangoma can come and do the things so that they sleep peacefully. And then when it starts again, they have to go back to, like, you guys are spending a lot. You know what I mean? Like,
I have another spooky story for you guys. This one was submitted by someone who stayed with her recently widowed aunt shortly after a medical procedure. Now, at first, she assumed the strange things that she noticed in the house were just a result of her aunt's grieving and loneliness. But as the days went on, it became harder and harder for her to ignore what she was experiencing in that house. Let's just get right into the story. I stayed with my aunt for a few weeks after a surgery that left me unable to be on my own. It wasn't anything life-threatening, but I needed help getting around, and she insisted that I come stay with her instead of struggling alone in my apartment. At the time, she had been widowed for a little over a year, and I remember worrying that I might be imposing on her while she was still grieving. From the moment I arrived, something about the house felt frozen in time. My uncle's belongings were still scattered around the house. His shoes were still left by the front door, his jacket was hung on the back of the kitchen chair, and his favorite mug still sat on the kitchen counter. Given how close they had been, it didn't surprise me that she couldn't bring herself to put his stuff away yet. But I'm not gonna lie, it creeped me out quite a bit. What stood out more, though, was how she behaved when she thought she was alone. I would hear her talking softly to herself from the bedroom or the kitchen, speaking in the same tone that she used to use with my uncle when he was still alive. I would catch her when she was alone, laughing quietly, and then pausing as if listening, and then sometimes responding as if she was answering someone back. At dinner, she still cooked his favorite meals and set out 3 plates, always placing one at the far end of the table where my uncle used to sit. At night, when I would pass her bedroom, I would notice that she always left a space on one side of the bed with the covers folded back carefully, as if she were expecting someone to come join her. I told myself that her strange behavior was just grief, the kind that settles deep and takes time to loosen its grip. Losing a spouse does strange things to people, and I didn't want to judge the way she coped. But one afternoon, I caught a glimpse of her in the living room, standing near the window with her hand held out, fingers curled slightly, as if she was holding someone's hand. She was smiling and nodding along, murmuring in response to something that I couldn't hear. When she noticed me watching, she lowered her hand and changed the subject so quickly that it left me unsettled. The first time I heard his voice, I assumed she had someone else over. It was late and I was half asleep when I heard a deep, kind of familiar male voice drifting down the hallway. I couldn't make out the words, but it sounded like a quiet, intimate conversation between the man and my aunt. I figured she had started seeing someone and simply didn't want to explain it to me. That explanation made sense until the night that I saw them together. I woke up needing water and walked past her bedroom on the way to the kitchen. The door was slightly open, and I glanced in without thinking. What I saw made me stop dead in my tracks. My aunt was in bed, her body pressed back into the mattress, reacting to touches that I couldn't see. The sheets were pulled tight in places and dipped down as if someone else was there with her. Her hair lifted and fell like fingers were threading through it, and she whispered my uncle's name. I didn't wait around trying to understand it. I quietly tiptoed away and went back to my room, my heart racing as I repeated the same thoughts over and over. She has to be imagining it, and I must be seeing things. Maybe she has someone else over again, and I just didn't notice him in there with her. The next morning, I sat at the kitchen table with my coffee, waiting to see who would come downstairs. Eventually, my aunt appeared alone, calm and unbothered, as if nothing unusual had happened. I asked her, as gently as I could, if someone else had been in the home the night before. She looked confused and said no. When I insisted that I heard a man's voice, she smiled softly and said, "That was your uncle." I tried to tell her that wasn't possible, that he'd passed away, and what she was experiencing was grief playing tricks on her mind. She became upset in a way that I hadn't seen before. Her voice was shaking as she insisted he was real and that she could feel him, hear him, and that he had never truly left. I decided to drop the subject, to avoid further upsetting her. That night, I struggled to sleep while my thoughts were tangled with doubt and embarrassment. Sometime after midnight, I woke to the sensation of someone sitting on the edge of my bed, the mattress dipping under their weight. I could hear slow, steady breathing close to my shoulder, heavy enough that I felt it against my skin. I reached for the lamp, assuming it was my aunt coming to check on me, but when I turned on the light, no one was there. As I lay back trying to calm myself, something gently brushed the hair away from my face, like a familiar gesture meant to reassure rather than frighten. I just laid there, suddenly certain that it wasn't my imagination, and that whatever had been visiting my aunt came over to see me too. I went home about a week later. When I hugged my aunt goodbye, she held on longer than usual and told me that she wouldn't be around much longer, but that everything would be all right. At the time, I assumed she was speaking emotionally, maybe even dramatically, but 4 months later, she passed away quietly in her sleep from natural causes. Her son and his family live in the house now, and they've never reported anything strange. I still don't have a clear explanation for what I witnessed during that time. Maybe grief does more than we understand, or perhaps some things just don't fit neatly into logic. So what do you guys think about the story? Was this just grief? Or did the uncle's spirit really stick around until his wife was ready to join him? Tell me your theories down in the comments, and don't forget to like and follow for the next spooky story.
Would you move to a house next to a cemetery? I am back with another spooky story, and you may not want to watch this one at night. We're going to call the person who submitted this story Neek. So Neek says, I'm sharing this because what happened to my family didn't just target one person. It took all of us. So Neek says that they moved into this house and there was a cemetery next door. By the way, this happened in Georgia. Now, at first, they weren't worried about the cemetery being next door because the trees were thick, so you can barely see into the cemetery. The fence wall was pretty tall, and the realtor guy just brushed past it like it was nothing. The realtor even told them that the cemetery was old, not to worry about it, and that no one has been buried there in decades. At the moment, it was comforting for them, until it wasn't. So once they moved in, the first thing to change was the house itself. So according to Neek, the doors wouldn't stay closed, the cabinets open on their own, the hallway always felt colder than the rest of the house, regardless of the season. Another creepy thing, her younger brother started sleepwalking, and he would stop every night at the same place, and it would be directly in front of the window facing the cemetery. He would just stand there, staring, in a trance. When it starts to get dark, that's when things would get worse. At night, they heard knocking. The knocking wasn't coming from the front door. No, it was coming from the walls. The knocking was like slow and deliberate, as if someone was testing the house. Now, as if things couldn't get any worser, no, they started having weird dreams in the house. And everybody in that house had them. Different dreams, same setting. In the dream, they were all standing in their backyard, staring through the fence at the cemetery, while something on the other side whispered their names, basically luring them to come into the cemetery in their dreams. And the thing is, none of them admitted to this at first. Everybody was just having their own individual nightmares. People were scared that saying it out loud would make it real. Well, Neek's mom started changing. Well, her mother grew irritable and paranoid. Would sit in the living room late at night staring at nothing. It would catch her praying under her breath. Sometimes it would catch her arguing with someone who was not there. Now, their father, who never believed in anything supernatural, he became very withdrawn. He stopped sleeping in their bedroom. He started saying that the bedroom felt crowded and that there were too many people in that room. Their dogs refused to go into the backyard. If they forced that dog to go out there, he would whine, shake, and just be scratching at the door until they let him back in. So one night, they had a storm and the power went out. And for the first time since they've been living in the house, they've been experiencing other things. But this time, they heard singing. Like a soft voice singing. It was slightly off key, but it was definitely coming from the direction of the cemetery. It sounded like children singing. Neek's little sister at the time started screaming. She said she could see shapes moving between the headstones, pressing against their fence, reaching through the gaps. Well, by morning, that fence looked like it was beat the fuck up. At that point, the mom said, nah, we need a priest. So they got a priest to come. He pulled up, he blessed the house, he prayed in every room, anointed the doors, and then finally things got quiet for a few days. Because then the activity came back. This time, the activity doubled. At this point, things is bad. There's no questioning whether this house is haunted. Objects were thrown, mirrors were cracked, people would wake up with handprints on them, and everybody in that house slowly but surely felt like they started to lose their minds. Like they were so angry and irritable. So bad that the dad started putting his hands on the mother, something that he's never done before, in all 20 years of them being married. Well, finally, her parents decided to move because everything was just going so bad. From the relationship to the hauntings, they decided to break the lease and move. Well, a few months after that, they moved. The only thing is that when they moved into their new house, everything was going good. Till it wasn't again. Because Neek is sure that something followed them from that house. Whatever that is, isn't as strong as whatever it was in the previous house. Even in their new house, they would wake up to cabinets being open or finding random footprints in the house. But that's a lot better than everything that they experienced in the house across the street from the cemetery. Oh my god. Thank you so much for submitting this spooky story. If you have a spooky story that you want me to tell, feel free to submit it to me right here on TikTok or on Instagram via DM. If you want longer, better, and spookier stories, you better make sure you subscribe to my YouTube channel. I literally just dropped a deep dive about how the government uses witchcraft on YouTube. So I actually just posted a deep dive on YouTube about how the government uses witchcraft. Make sure you follow me for spooky content. Ciao.
Let's read a scary stalker story I found on Reddit. A few years ago, my anxiety was high. I was already at a point in my life where I thought I was a little out of it, but that was amplified by a lot when I kept repeatedly hearing noises outside of my window. Like every single night, it just wouldn't stop. I would finally get so freaked out, I'd go wake up my parents and get them to look outside, but they never found anything. I started to think I was crazy or just subconsciously seeking attention. One morning, my grandfather discovered one of our lawn chairs beneath our bathroom window. It's pretty high up and the bottom pane is fogged, so I'm not sure the chair even helped, but it was left there regardless. The next night, heard sounds again. Nothing. The night after, however, we checked outside and discovered something that made my stomach churn. A small stepladder was sitting directly outside of my window, back just enough to allow someone to sit on it but still see. On my windowsill was a bag of now cold McDonald's, which is just up the street from me. Most of the food was still in there, but still, some fucker had just been watching me doing absolutely nothing of interest in my room without me knowing for I don't know how long. The cops were called, nothing happened. I felt crazier than ever. No one was to be found, but at least we had some evidence that someone that shouldn't be hovering around our house was at my window, watching intently through the blinds in a space between the two chairs. Heard noises the next night, ran outside, nothing. Earlier in the night, I had sewn my curtains together, which hopefully made it harder to see in. Apparently it did, because now the fucker had taken to climbing on top of our air conditioning unit, and from there, climbing onto our garbage can, then standing on that so he could hopefully see above where the drapes went. The handprints and shoe prints were left on the lid to prove it. I should also mention that there were now holes in my screen, and I heard those holes be created. He took a stick and sharpened it somehow. We found it outside of my window, and was trying to stealthily break away the screen bit by bit. The hole is still there. The next night, I distinctly heard the gravel near my window crunch. There was simply no mistaking my sound. As stealthily as I could, I let out a small moan he surely heard and rolled over just out of view as if I were sleeping, then pressed myself against a wall out of view of the window, very quietly opened my door and crept down the hall. My heart was pounding. Normally I knock on my parents' door, but I knew the slightest sound would make the bastard bolt, so I quietly opened the door and snuck in, then informed them that there was, without a single doubt, someone outside my window. They didn't mind the intrusion and got up, got dressed, formulated a plan, and crept to the back door. I ran to the bathroom to stand on the edge of our tub and peek out the window just as the back door was thrown open and my parents ran outside like morons. And sure enough, they saw him. They started screaming as the man leapt off the garbage can and bolted down our driveway, which is what I was looking at. They screamed all sorts of horrible things at the top of their lungs. He ended up escaping across the street, hiding behind a house adjacent to us. The balls on this bastard. He kept peeking out at us as we all stood outside, but we wanted to leave him there so the cops could finally nab him. They were called, they came, and they searched, but they never found him. Bastard must have hopped a fence or something. Still to this day I hear sounds outside my window, even in the dead of winter, but he's never out there. He might have just been a peeper, but he targeted me specifically for months until he was almost caught. What really pisses me off is that once he lost interest in me because it was too unsafe, he moved onto a house down the street with 2 little girls. He actually managed to get in through their window, and their dad caught him just standing in the middle of the room watching them sleep. I still don't think he was caught even then. All I know is that it could have been way worse, but it messed me up. I trust the men in my neighborhood even less now. The men around here stare very blatantly. I've been chased home by one. I've had a guy try to jerk me into his car while I was passing him, telling him no, I didn't need a ride, and to leave me alone. All these years later, I still hear shit outside my window and freak out. I turn out my lights entirely to exercise. I do my best to avoid the windows when I undress. It just scarred me. That is horrible that he has not been caught. Men.
The deeper I dive into these creepy search and rescue stories, the more questions I have than answers. This is number 17 from Rob. If you're new here, I tell creepy stories of all kinds, but lately we have been on a roll going down rabbit holes with Rob, the search and rescue officer. So Rob says that one night before bed, him and his crew members were all kind of sitting around the fire, telling ghost stories, mostly just to get a rise out of each other and poke fun at the ones who actually got creeped out. Rob said that mostly it's just the rookies, but one of the women told a story that managed to get under Rob's skin. We're going to call her Jen. Rob said that Jen claims that this story is true. And then he goes, then again, all ghost stories told around the campfire are true. But then he got a little more serious and said, but I don't think she was making this up. When Jen was a child, she said that her and her friend used to go and play out in the woods a lot. Jen lived in northern Maine, and there was a lot of dense, unpopulated national forests in her area, and the woods that she would play in were right behind her house. Jen and her friend grew up there, so they weren't really scared about being out in the forest alone. They knew to remain cautious in certain areas and generally stayed pretty safe. Jen says that the woods there are a lot different than other areas. She said that there are some places that are so dense that the trees block out the sun. Now, Jen did say that while it was never talked about very much, they just sort of knew that general rule of thumb was you don't ever go much further than a mile or 2 past the house. The adults really never gave a good reason why. It was just understood that those were the rules and you follow them. Jen said that one year there were a series of storms and they blew a lot of the trees down. Said a forest fire even broke out a couple miles back behind her house. Jen said that the fire crews got it under control, but as they would come back from the scene, the looks on their faces told her that they had come back not the same. She says it was like they'd been to war. You could just see it on their faces. She said she thinks it was called shell shock. She said the people looked like they were from The Walking Dead, and if you'd approach them, they wouldn't smile or acknowledge or anything. They just kind of had this zoned out expression on their face. She even brought it up to her parents, and they just said that they didn't know what she was talking about. Once everyone was told that the woods were safe again, Jen and her friend decided that they're gonna go hike out to the area where the fires were. She said they didn't tell their parents where they were going, and it was almost exciting that they were disobeying them like that. So they hike out about 2 miles and they start seeing burnt trees. And there was one moment where Jen's friend got really upset because they saw a skeleton of a deer laying at the base of a tree, and Jen remembers that its antlers didn't look right. Her friend wanted to bury it, but she remembers saying, no, don't touch that thing because something was just really off about it. She said the further they got into it, the more burnt everything was, and it eventually got to a point where there were no more standing trees, and it started looking like they were on another planet. Then as they're looking around, they heard someone shouting from the distance, and Jen's friend broke off and dove behind a rock to hide because she thought it might be one of their dads, and she told her parents that she was going to a movie with Jen because her parents told her she was not allowed to go in the woods at all anymore. But Jen thought maybe it's a hiker that lost their way and needs directions back to town. She said that happened a lot. So Jen starts calling out, and this person hears her and he's calling back to her. And as he's coming into view, Jen says that she noticed his face was all red. So she thought maybe he needed like a first aid kit or something. So she calls over to her friend and says, let me have your first aid kit out of your pack, because they always carried it with them. And her friend reluctantly, almost seemingly grossed out, was like, do you see his face? And she kind of didn't want to give it up, but Jen kind of turned around and looked at this guy, and the closer he got, the more she realized what she was seeing. Now, staring at him closer and horrified, she notices that his lips and nose and part of his forehead were missing, like they were cut clean off. Jen said he was bleeding pretty badly, and she could tell that there was some coming through his pants around his knees. And then he comes right up to her and he grabs her by the shoulders, and she felt like this jolt shock shoot through her, and he kind of bounced back off of her. He kept on babbling in a panicked way, and she said she couldn't understand what he was saying, but all she could make out was he kept asking over and over again, "How long have I been gone?" He also asked her where his unit was, but she just kept shaking her head like she has no idea what is happening. Jen said he just kept babbling and touching his face, and then she noticed he wasn't wearing the right clothing. She also said that he looked over and he saw her Walkman, and it made him panic and scream even more. Jen says that he was wearing like a gray cloth jacket, and his pants looked almost formal. His jacket had these weird buttons with red borders, and the whole time she's just taking this all in. She's just shaking her head and saying, "I'm sorry, I don't know what you're saying." So all she could do was sort of fumble around for the first aid kit to just sort of get anything out there to help him. And when he saw her do that, he just screamed and he said, "Don't touch me. You're going to make me go back. I don't want to go back there." And with that, he just took off screaming and running in the opposite direction. And he kept on yelling until he was so far away that they couldn't hear him yelling anymore. And Jen turned over and looks at her friend, and she's just standing there bawling. So Jen just kind of says, "Come on," and leads her, and they walk back to town. Her friend kept asking her, "Who was that? What was that?" And Jen just kept shrugging and shaking her head. She had no idea. And then she did end up saying to her friend, "I don't want to play in the woods with you anymore." And she said after that, they still remained friends, but they never talked about that guy ever again. There are so many questions. It almost sounds like he's some kind of soldier from the past. Please let me know your thoughts in the comments. And follow and stay tuned for more creepy story time. Ew, ew, ew. Listen to this story from Rob, the search and rescue officer. This is going to be number 16 in the lineup, and it's one of the creepiest yet. Rob had been sharing his stories, and one of the vets recognized it, and they immediately came up to him, and they had to share their own. We're going to call this vet Brad. So Brad was out on a training exercise, and he was sleeping in a tent, and he was awakened by the sound of somebody walking around the outside of the camp. Brad said that they're told not to wander far, and that he thought maybe it was a rookie who had to get up and go pee and then couldn't find his way back. I guess a few years prior, somebody was wandering around like that out in the dark in an unfamiliar territory, and they ended up almost falling down a mountainside. So while Brad was really tired, half asleep, and he didn't really feel like talking to anybody, he'd rather that than have an incident happen. So Brad gets out of his tent and he goes towards the noise about the edge of camp, and he yells out and says, "Hey, camp's back this way." It was too dark to see anybody or anything, but he was hoping for an answer back, but none came. And the noise kept going out further deeper into the woods. And hindsight, Brad says, "I know that makes me pretty stupid, but I followed them." He said he followed them for almost a mile, and then they stopped at the edge of a little river. He said he could see their outline because the moon was bright and it was kind of glistening off of the water, so he could tell that it was the general shape of a guy. He appeared to have a backpack on, and it seemed as though this person was facing Brad. Brad said, "Are you okay? Do you need help?" And there was no verbal response, but the figure just kind of cocked its head, like he didn't understand what Brad was saying. So Brad has a pocket knife on him at all times, and it had a little thumb light on it. So Brad took out the light and he illuminated, but just the chest, so as not to sort of blind the other person. The first thing that Brad noticed was that this person was breathing really strangely, almost too deep. He said it seemed like maybe he was somebody who was sleepwalking. Brad said, so he went a little closer and he asked again, "Are you okay?" And he just kept noticing things that were just all wrong. And he's got the light still on his midsection, and he notices that this breathing is just super weird, and he's realizing that that's what's bothering him. He said the breaths were too even and deep, almost like forced, like they were pretending to breathe. The way that the shoulders raised and dropped and the chest heaved in and out at that really weird, slow pace. He's freaking out a little bit inside, thinking, what is going on here with somebody pretending to breathe but not really doing it? And he said, you need to identify yourself. And all he got back was a real weird muffled sound. So now Brad moves the light up to illuminate the face, and he said that this person or thing had no face, just smooth skin covering where his face should be. So Brad is freaking out. He's fumbling with his light, and he said that in that second, that creature, without seemingly moving to get to him, went from the edge of the water to 5 feet right in front of Brad. He said he didn't really see the thing come towards him. It's just like in a second, the thing almost like teleported right to 5 feet away from Brad. So now Brad trips and stumbles and falls on his ass. And he said he looked up at this creature and a big gash opened up on its throat. Brad said, I kid you not, this line opened up to both ears of this thing, and he tilted his head back and smiled at Brad with his throat. Brad said there wasn't any blood. It was just a gaping, dark hole smiling at him. Brad got up and he started running as fast as he could back to camp. He said he continuously heard this thing like right behind him, despite the fact that when he would turn around, he could see nothing there. Brad flies back to camp, and when he gets back, he notices that the campfire is still going. So he goes over, almost feeling a little bit safer in the light of the fire, and he just stood there staring for the longest time, waiting to see if anything would come back. After a little while goes by, Brad feels like it's safe and he goes back to bed, which I don't know how he could have done that. I would have probably not slept at all. Brad said that it was so surreal and unbelievable that almost like a coping mechanism, his brain had to tell himself that it was all just his imagination. Oh my gosh, what are your thoughts? Leave them in the comments. If you haven't done so already, give me a follow and stay tuned for more creepy story time.
My boyfriend swapped faces and I have zero explanation. This spooky scary story time was submitted by Lindsay, and she wants to know if what you think happened deals with lizard people, or if it's like possession, or if it's something else entirely. But Lindsay says she grew up in kind of like a traumatic environment. She had a lot of neglect as a child, and as a result, she entered the party scene when she was a young adult. If you're new here, Spooky Scary Story Time is a series where I share listeners' allegedly true stories about the things that they think nobody else will believe. Okay. It was the early 2000s. She was 17 and she was dating a guy that was significantly older than her, but they were living together in an apartment and they would party all the time together. And she did admittedly say that there were a lot of substances involved. But this one night they're at home, they were just drinking. She says she laid down on the pull-out couch in the living room. Her boyfriend was sleeping next to her, but she was kind of restless. She was just tossing and turning, and she heard a noise next to her. So she turns to face her boyfriend. She starts to see his face morph. She said he was skinny with blue eyes and blonde hair that he would buzz. But as she watched his face, she watched it morph into like this chubbier, brown face with dark hair, but his eyes were still closed. But she also noticed his mouth because his teeth were different. Like his teeth all of a sudden were spacing apart, and he almost had like buck teeth. She said she had no idea what was happening, so she asked, "Who are you?" And he said, "I'm your boyfriend." And then he started laughing this uncontrollable laugh, which she said wasn't evil, but it was like it got stuck in her head the way that you have an acquaintance that has like kind of an obnoxious laugh like that way. His laugh's just echoing over and over in her head. Now, also, admittedly, she did say that at this point in her life, paranoia was high because of all the substances she was using, and so she thought she was having some kind of psychosis. She said that the people around her knew that she was using and like knew that she had this paranoia and thought she was crazy. But after a minute or two, the energy shifted and his face returned normal. His face was back to normal. She shook him and woke him up, and he was like, "I have no idea what you're talking about. Just go back to sleep. You're being crazy." Even though the relationship was toxic, she continued dating him for a while, but she said strange things would happen in the apartment all the time, even when they were sober. Like she would see shadows in the corner of the room, or she would hear strange noises. But he never again changed faces in front of her. But eventually time went on, they broke up, she cleaned her life up. And she chalked the incident up to, like I said, substance-induced psychosis. Over time, she got better and her memory of that time period faded. And fast forward a few years, she's dating this new guy. This guy's a lot better. All in all, it's going well. And a couple months into dating, they're having like the ex conversation. And she's like, "Well, tell me about your exes." And he's like, "Well, the last girl I dated before you, her name was also Lindsay, but it was spelled with an E." He's like, "She was crazy." And Lindsay's like, "Yeah, all guys say that. Like, why was she crazy?" And he's like, "Well, one night I was like passed out next to her and she woke me up. She told me my face was changing." Lindsay said all of a sudden all those memories from that night came flooding back, and she was like, "What do you mean? What did she say that your face looked like?" And he was like, "Well, she said that my face was morphing into like a blonde skinny guy with like a buzz cut and blue eyes." He said when he said that, her face went white as a ghost and she froze, and he was like, "What's wrong?" And she said in that moment she realized that the face that she saw that night was that of her current boyfriend. She said she didn't say a word about it for fear of being labeled as crazy because she had been labeled as crazy before and she didn't want him to think less of her somehow. But it's been like 20 years. And she said she still thinks about this moment as like one of the most bizarre things she's ever experienced. And she's tried to look online, but like can't find any even similar stories to this. Like, I don't really care about being labeled as crazy anymore. I'm really just curious as to what people think happened. Like, did they really swap faces? Send her the link to this video. Let her know what you think. And if you have a story, we would love to hear it. I'm going to try to post as often as I usually do this week, but with the holiday and everything, I don't know, but I've got more coming for you.
I want to share something that happened to me in Paravalje, a small town in Slovenia, a place surrounded by forests, mountains, and old folklore. There lives a woman known for having the table that lifts. People from nearby villages come to her because they say when you sit at her table and open yourself to it, something begins to move. When I visited, there were 4 of us, me, my cousin, and 2 guys. The woman warned us that if someone doesn't believe, nothing will happen. She said disbelief closes the energy. So the 2 men stepped out, and only my cousin and I remained. She didn't perform a ritual or say any special words. She simply showed us the small wooden table in her stable, told us to sit down, and quietly left the room. At first, everything was still. Then, I began to feel a strange sensation, a tingling running through my hands and up my arms, spreading through my body like a quiet current. It was as if the table and I were connected, like it was aware of us, and then it moved. Not just a little tremble, the table actually lifted.
Oh my gosh.
And shifted across the floor. We could feel it, pushing against our hands, tilting and almost pulling us with it.
Is this like table tipping then?
Yeah, it moved with force, as though it had its own energy or will. They call it the dancing table in Prevalja. Some people say it's the spirits communicating, others that it's a kind of collective energy that only appears when people truly believe. Scientists might call it the ideomotor effect, unconscious muscle movements, but when you're sitting there watching a heavy wooden table rise and sway beneath your hands, it doesn't feel like science, it feels alive. That night when I left the house, I couldn't stop thinking about it. Whatever it was, spiritual, energetic, or something beyond explanation, that table in Prevalja really moved, and I felt it. This article by Sara Bukernik says, first of all, let me say that I never believed in moving objects that can predict the future and know more about me than I know myself, until one Saturday afternoon when my friend and I went for a trip. Since then, I don't know what to think, who and what to believe, or how to explain the matter with any common sense. But let's go in order. When I entered my first year of college, I met classmates from different places around Slovenia. There were some girls from Carinthia who repeatedly told us stories about a talking table that predicted the future, which was supposedly located where they lived. Of course, I had my own opinion on the matter, namely that this could be a figment of my imagination or something from fiction. However, because I find such things so interesting, I did a little browsing on the internet. I came up with some forums and interesting articles, even television reports that specifically talk about the talking table of Carinthia. It is more than 100-year-old wooden table that's located in Prevalja in Carinthia. The table stands in a room in one of the farms. We should go.
Yeah.
100%. We have to go. It can be visited by practically anyone who's interested. The visit's free, and the family that lives there does not charge an entrance fee, and they don't benefit financially. The internet is full of stories about this miraculous table. The family does not make a profit, so what's going on? What's happening that hordes of people are visiting this table? My friend and I got in the car and went on a trip. I can imagine this for us. You'd be driving. We followed the Kojelnik sign, and soon we were there in the farmyard. Let me emphasize once again, I admit we'd driven out of curiosity and above all the fact that it proved that a piece of wood cannot have the ability to predict the future. The owner, an elderly lady, let us into the house, into a small room where there was a small, seemingly old table. We were given instructions on how to use it, and then we were left alone in the room. The instructions to the table are simple. You sit there, place your hands on it, then you start by asking the table questions, but in such a way that the answer is yes or no. If the talking table does not move, it means no. If it rises, it means yes. The question can be asked out loud or in your mind. I know it sounds funny, crazy and stupid, but my friends did as we were told. We put our hands on the table and started asking questions. But nothing happened. The old lady came into the room, sat down and explained that when we first visit a table, it usually takes a little longer for the talking table to start a conversation and get used to new energies. So all 3 of us placed our palms on the table and waited. After a while, the old lady said, Table, are you ready? It took my breath away like never before. The table actually rose.
Oh my God.
I would say at least 5 centimeters. She left the room. My friend and I needed a few minutes to come to our senses. We continued to ask questions, everything that came to our mind. I asked if I had a sister. The table remained still. Then I asked if I had a brother. The table rose. She was right. I have a younger brother. What we saw was happening with our own eyes. If I hadn't had my friend with me, I might have thought I was dreaming, but we saw the same thing. It communicated with us and answered all the questions from the past correctly, both for me and for my friend. I didn't want to ask too many questions about the future because I wasn't interested and I didn't want to bother with that. The crazy adventure inside the simple room on a lonely farm was enough for me. We couldn't believe our eyes. I thought about everything possible, the possibility someone was manipulating the table, but no one on the farm could know the correct answers to the questions. So what drives it? Human energy? What else? I don't know. I can't explain and I have no idea. I studied the existing literature a bit, and to explain briefly, it's a parapsychological phenomenon of talking objects, also known in English as table tipping. There are supposedly quite a few such talking tables around the world, and in Slovenia there are said to be 3 in Corinthia. However, all these tables have one thing in common: they're exclusively made of wood. The owner of the farm I visited even told me that their talking table had been taken to the Joseph Stefan Institute some time ago, but they didn't discover anything. Some claim today it's a trick and a deception, others that it's an extraordinary power of human energy, and others that it's just an illusion. So there you go. That's that.
Well, we'll go and find that dancing table.
I can't wait to go table tipping in Slovenia.
Weird, spooky Christmas stories. It sounded like the mimic that lives in their house just wanted to show a little Christmas affection. So this Reddit user says that they struggle with insomnia and anxiety. So sleep rarely comes easy for them. Because of that, they're usually awake at the witching hour, 3 a.m. And for this person, that's when strange things start to happen. They said sometimes it's just their cat doing late night zoomies, but other times it's things that they cannot explain. On this particular night, they were sitting at their kitchen table working on these handmade fobs that they make for craft shows. They said if they couldn't sleep, they might as well do something productive to keep busy. Their back was facing a long, dark hallway. They said they were wearing a headset listening to a podcast, so they couldn't hear anything, but they felt something. Through the floorboards, they felt someone walking, slow, steady, coming up the hallway. But they were home alone. Footsteps in that house aren't new to them, so first they just ignored it, because usually nothing else follows. But this night, something did. The footsteps came right up behind their chair. Then they felt arms wrap around them. Not aggressively, just a gentle hug. A familiar hug. The exact kind their wife gives them when they come up behind them, rest their chin on their shoulder, and watches what they're doing. Except their wife wasn't home. They froze, trying not to move, until it finally released them. They felt it drift away towards the door that they were facing, the one with Christmas decorations hanging on it. And right in front of them, the decorations shifted. Just slightly, just enough to prove that the presence was real. In a matter of seconds, they experienced disembodied footsteps, a phantom embrace, and an object moving. They go on to say that both they and their wife have experienced something in the house that mimics both of their voices, and even their actions. It switches back and forth between them. So their best guess was a mimic came up behind them and mimicked their wife's loving gesture, just without showing itself. They said the only other possibility is that their wife's grandma usually makes a show during the holidays. It's mostly a quiet spirit, but becomes really active during Christmas. They said that whoever or whatever it was didn't feel threatening, that it felt comforting. They said that given the rough week that they'd been having, they felt that it was really intentional. A gentle touch from something unseen at 3 a.m. So when they mentioned mimics, I was like, oh my gosh, get out. But then they're saying that they don't feel threatened, so maybe they have both. Maybe the grandma tries to combat this mimic, because mimics are not safe. They're not a good thing. So I'm thinking that this gentle hug, maybe it was the grandma protecting them from a mimic that was approaching. I don't know, because if you're hearing your voices back and forth, that's not the grandma. And especially it being Christmas time and you saying she becomes really active during this time, that's what I think. I think the mimic was coming up and the grandma embraced you to protect you. Let me know in the comments what you guys think, or if you've ever experienced anything like this, send it my way.
Have you been on a bus and noticed someone in full cosplay. Usually happens during convention season or near popular photo shoot locations. But what if the people you assumed were cosplayers weren't cosplayers at all? Something physically there but not supposed to be seen. The story I'm telling you today is an urban legend that's been around for decades. It's about a bus that disappeared one night in Beijing and was later found submerged in a reservoir. And what happened on that bus is the kind of thing that sounds impossible until you hear the details. Bus 375, one of Beijing's most well-known ghost bus legends. November 14th, 1995, Beijing. It's just past midnight, and the last bus of the day, number 375, pulls out of Yuanmingyuan terminus. This was the final run. The destination was Xiangshan, way out on the edge of the city. Because it was late at night, empty roads, pitch black, freezing cold. On the bus, they're just the driver and a female conductor. The bus is cruising through the darkness when it stops at the south gate, next to the old summer palace. The doors open and 4 people get on. An old lady, a young couple, and a young guy by himself. The couple takes seats up front, right behind the driver. The old lady, the young man sit across from each other near the door. Nobody's talking. The couple's practically nodding off, trying to stay awake so they don't miss their stop. All you can hear is the engine and the wind outside. They're driving through a remote stretch now, and the silence gets heavier. So they're just driving along, and suddenly the driver sees 2 figures on the side of the road, waving the bus down. The doors open, and 3 men walk on. And here is where it gets weird. 2 of the men are holding up a 3rd guy between them, supporting him by his shoulders. The guy in the middle looks just completely out of it, head down, disheveled, like he's drunk or passed out, and you can't see his face. And all 3 of them are wearing traditional Qing dynasty robes, ancient Chinese clothing. Their faces are deathly pale, maybe because of the makeup, and they're staring blankly at the conductor without saying a word.
I have multiple spooky encounters to share. Some are my personal experiences, and some are from the girls I lived with. For reference, I lived in a haunted group home. Rumor was that a father and a daughter lived there a long time ago, and the father had murdered his own daughter in the closet in the back room. After he did that, he hung himself in the same room. This alone scared me a lot, but I decided not to believe it. But that quickly changed after these encounters. My first encounter was actually sleep paralysis. I never had sleep paralysis before, and honestly, this experience changed my life forever. I was sleeping on my back when I awoke. I don't know what woke me up, but I realized that I couldn't open my eyes all the way, and I couldn't move. It felt like a pressure was pushing on my chest, preventing me from moving. When I looked, I saw a fist pushing down on my chest. The fist had no details and led to an all-black figure with no discernible features. But one thing I noticed was that his arm was super long to the point he was standing straight while his arm was on my chest. And since I couldn't open my eyes all the way, I couldn't see his face. I was absolutely terrified and quickly closed my eyes and began praying to God to push whatever evil was holding me captive to leave me. Not soon after, a staff member opened the door to bring me my medication, and just like that, I was able to move again and open my eyes. I know it wasn't a dream because it was so real and it absolutely terrified me. This next experience wasn't mine, but another girl's. The movie The Conjuring had just come out, and some of the girls and I watched it in the theaters. We decided we wanted to play the clap game in complete darkness, because I mean, what could go wrong? We turned off all the lights and began the game. 10 minutes into the game, one of the girls screamed at the top of her lungs. The lights turned on super quick, and we all ran into the living room, terrified out of our minds. The girl who screamed told us that while she was hiding around a corner in the hallway, she looked to her side to see a small girl that was glowing, crouching next to her, going, "Shh," into the screaming. After that, we never played the game again because of fear of one of us seeing the girl crouching next to us like it did to her. Well, a couple nights later, we were all sleeping when our staff went into the bathroom. She heard someone knocking on the door and asked them to give her a second. There was a second knock. She finished her business and opened the door to nothing. Thinking it was one of us girls, she walked to the 3 rooms, but we were all fast asleep.
Let's read some more scary Reddit stories. These are all not paranormal too, which in my opinion is a little scarier. I used to sleepwalk when I was a child. We lived in a rough neighborhood in Decatur, Georgia, and I would wake up outside in the middle of the night, not knowing how I got there, and would have to walk home and walk into the darkened doorway I had left open for whoever might be lurking around. However, the time that scared me the most was when I was about 9 years old. I woke up and found myself with the bedroom curtains drawn back and staring out the window. As I came awake, I noticed a very large, completely hairless man, no hair, no eyebrows, staring at me and slowly inching closer to the window and closer to my face. He was looking bewildered, like he wasn't sure what he was seeing. At that moment, I realized what was going on and I started screaming uncontrollably, frozen in place and peeing down my leg. The man freaked out and screamed, did a tumbling move, and then ran off in a weird zigzag like he was trying to dodge bullets. My mom woke up and thought I probably had a nightmare. But the next morning, we found a screwdriver on the front porch and damage to the door jamb and the door handle. I always parked in a certain spot at my last job for the 12 years that I was there. It was accessible to the public as it wasn't company parking, but they wanted us to park in the back of the lot so the closer spots could be available for customers. One day my spot was taken by a dark tinted caddy and I'm immediately pissed because everyone knows it's mine. It's morning shift, so around 4 a.m., so it can't be one of the other employees because I know what they drive. So newbie? Or maybe another employee from another shop in the plaza? It's still there on my lunch break and when I go home. And the next day, I come in at 1 p.m. till close. Around 9:30, it's still there. Something about it really bothered me. It smelled wrong. Literally, it's the South in high summer, and who knows what's baking in there. My dad was a Marine, then a police officer. He always said if you feel something is wrong, there probably is. So I dialed the non-emergency contact police number. I felt like an idiot, but every time I walked by, it bugged me. So I was stuck waiting for over an hour before anyone shows, and honestly, if I hadn't been off the next day, I probably would have been like, F it. But I waited, mostly because I can be a really petty SOB, and that's my spot, damn it. The police show, all annoyed because who knows how many "they can't park here" calls they get. They run the license plate though, and things go crazy. They want my info, want me to contact my manager. Does this lot have cameras? Have I touched the car? Etc. Apparently the car is on Amber Alert as the last sighting of a missing person who was a minor, a 15-year-old girl. When they pop the trunk, they find her unalived body under a blanket and the source of the smell. She had gone out with a much older, controlling, and insecure boyfriend, but had decided to get out of the relationship. She only made the mistake of getting into the car with him. He drove 3 counties over after torturing her, stuffing her in there, and who knows what else, then parked and walked away. I never learned her time of death, so it haunts me sometimes, thinking she might have been saved if I had made a fuss earlier. So yeah, listen to your gut even if it seems petty. Years ago at one of my first jobs, a colleague told me a story. The night before, she had gone out for some drinks, and on the way home, she had got off the bus and was walking down her road to her house. A taxi pulled up alongside her, and the driver told her to get in the car. She obviously said no. He then said to her, "Call whoever you want while you're in the car, but please just get in and I'll explain." So she got in. Turns out, walking behind her was a topless guy with no shoes on and a machete in his hand. Cab driver had already called the police, but then saw my colleague, so he stopped to look after her. That one is terrifying. This happened when I was 4. There was an old man who always brought a small rope with him and a teenage boy who looked huge and physically strong. They often knocked on doors asking for money. Then one time, they knocked on the door and I opened it. They didn't even let me open the door fully. They pushed the door so hard that I fell to the ground. My guess is that they thought I was alone. They tried to grab me, but luckily my parents were home and they came out. They got a little defensive and still didn't want to leave the house without getting any money. My father gave them some money, and thankfully those crazy people left. After a week, we heard on the news that a kid my age was unalived in our neighborhood by an old man, and the house was robbed after. I was home alone one day when I was 15. I was chilling downstairs when I needed to go to the bathroom, so I grabbed my phone and walked to the stairs to go upstairs. Right as I passed the door and about to go upstairs, someone knocks on the door. I don't answer the door when I'm home alone, so I just sat in the corner between the door and the stairs until the guy left. The knocks were fairly loud, and he knocked 4 times. After a little bit of no knocking, I figured he was gone. All of a sudden, I hear our back door open. I bolt upstairs and lock myself in my room. I texted my mom, "Someone is here." I texted and called my grandma, who lives literally a minute away, that there was someone in the house and for her to come over ASAP. Then I called 911. I could hear the guy come upstairs and walked around to all of the rooms. I'm sitting as far away from the door and as hidden as I can be when he jiggles the doorknob and tries to come into my room. I about lost it there. My grandma actually beat the cops to the house. Cops found the guy and arrested him. I was just glad that he didn't try and break into my neighbor's house where the 11-year-old girl was home alone.
If you have not heard this story, how do I say this? There is no word in the English language, in any language, that could accurately prepare you for not only how shocked but disturbed you're about to be. In 2001, an editor from the Boston Globe assigned a team of journalists to investigate allegations against a priest. The priest was accused of essaying more than 80 boys, and the group of journalists worked together to prove that dozens of Catholic priests had been essaying children for years, and that the church had been systematically hiding it. This is hands down one of the most important investigative journalism stories of the 21st century. And if you haven't watched the movie Spotlight on this, I highly, highly recommend it. Like right after when you're done with this video, go watch it. It's a mind-blowing story. Let's talk about it. In 2001, the Boston Globe, one of America's oldest and most respected newspapers, hired a new editor-in-chief, a guy called Marty Barron. Marty came from previously working at the Miami Herald, and he was seen as an outsider in every sense of the word. He was Jewish, not married, had no children, and was not from Boston, in a city where 50% of the population was Roman Catholic and where the church arguably held more power than most politicians. That mattered. As soon as Marty got settled in the office to start working, he read a small column that was kind of hidden. It was written by Aline McNamara. Aline was reporting on lawsuits pertaining to one priest, John Geoghegan. That priest had been accused of SA. She also mentioned a lawyer who represented 86 victims who suffered SA at the hands of the priest. And then Marty learned that the judge who worked on that case had sealed court records to prevent those records of the priest from going public. But what caught Marty's attention the most was that the column mentioned the cardinal, the Archbishop of Boston. It mentioned that he knew about the allegations against the priest of SA and did absolutely nothing about it. To explain, the Archbishop of Boston, in very simple terms, basically means the main leader of the Catholic Church in the Boston area. So the top priest in charge of Catholic churches, priests, and religious activities in and around Boston. So that guy knew about the SA allegations against the priest and ignored it. After reading that, Marty called a meeting with Walter "Robbie" Robinson. He was the editor of the Boston Globe Spotlight team at the time. The Spotlight team was and is, they're still a Spotlight team to this day, but they're special because they are the oldest continuously operating investigative journalism unit in American newspapers. They take months, sometimes years, on a single story, and they only report to their editor. Marty calls for a meeting with the team. He fills them in and he tells them that he's determined to dig deeper into the story and discover the truth. He wanted to go to the courts to get those records unsealed, and he wanted the Spotlight team to investigate the Catholic Church. The Spotlight team was hesitant because in Boston and kind of everywhere else, you do not mess with the church. You did not go after the church. But Marty wasn't willing to let it go, and the Spotlight team got on board. The team consisted of 4 journalists: Walter "Robbie" Robinson, the editor, a veteran Globe reporter who had been at the paper for over 25 years; Michael Resendez, a passionate reporter who did not like taking no for an answer; Sasha Pfeiffer,
a meticulous court reporter who connected with the victims, and Matt Carroll, the data journalist who focused on patterns in the numbers. So their first assumption was simple. They were going to be following the story of one priest, John Geoghegan, and that was it. But they were wrong, spectacularly wrong, and very quickly what started off as one case turned into something much bigger. Michael Resendez reaches out to Mitchell Garbedian, the lawyer representing John Geoghegan's victims. At first, Mitchell was not keen on talking to him. He had previously had bad experiences with reporters and did not immediately trust them. But Michael was persistent, and against his editor's orders, he revealed to Mitchell that he was working for Spotlight. In Mitchell's eyes, that changed everything because he knew that Spotlight did not put out quick, fast stories. They dug deeper, investigated, and really took their time on their stories, so he started talking. And he tells Michael, quote, "I have 86 clients, 86 victims, all victims of one priest." The team begins digging through court records, old newspaper articles, anything they can find, and they start seeing something. There's a pattern. Sasha Pfeiffer tracks down victims. Those conversations, they're not easy, they're brutal, they're heavy. Many victims had not spoken about what they went through in decades. Some were in very, very dark places with their mental health. Most, if not all, had clear signs of trauma. One victim tells Sasha about being SA'd since she was 7 years old. Another describes a priest who targeted children of families that were known to not have a lot of money, families who would never dare speak against the church. Another stated that the priest began SAing him when he was only 4 years old. That's preschool age. Another victim was one out of 7 brothers in the same family. Every single one of them had been SA'd by the same priest. A family member of theirs had written a desperate letter in 1982 begging the church to do something. That letter went ignored. Crazy. Matt Carroll, the data guy, he starts to create a database. He's tracking priests, parishes, complaints, and day after day, the number just keeps growing. 20 priests, then 30, then 50. The team contacts Phil Saviano, the head of a survivors network called SNAP, Survivors Network of Those by Priests. Saviano was someone who had been trying to get the media to pay attention about this for years, but no one ever listened to what he had to say. Phil Saviano gives the team a new name, Richard Sipe. Richard Sipe was a former Catholic priest, a psychotherapist, and a researcher. He had spent decades studying how priests and other religious leaders behave when it comes to having intimate relationships, meaning that he had been studying and paying attention to this problem for decades, and what he had to say would play a very big part in the team's investigation. Because he himself was a former priest, he had inside knowledge, long-term research, and documentation of a lot of things. And Richard tells the team, quote, "In any given city, approximately 6% of priests are SAing children. This isn't isolated, this is systemic," end quote. The Spotlight team does the math. Boston had 1,500 priests. If you went with that math, 6% would mean 90 priests, at least. As their investigation continued, they faced a lot of obstacles, one of the biggest ones being that the church had sealed most of the court records that could prove that Cardinal Law knew about the SA and covered it up. Those were locked away. Remember, Cardinal Bernard Law was the Archbishop of Boston during that time, aka the top Catholic leader in Boston. The Spotlight team needed to get a hold of those sealed documents because those documents would help them prove that Cardinal knew that the priests were SAing children, yet instead of reporting them to authorities, he would just move them to different churches, allowing the priest to continue what they were doing to even more children. The Globe goes to court. They petition to have the documents unsealed. The church fights back viciously, and they try every single tactic in the book to prevent those court documents from being unsealed. They threaten legal action. They claim privacy rights. They push back hard. But in late 2001, a judge ended up ruling in the Globe's favor. The documents were to be unsealed in January of 2002. And then September 11th happens. Understandably so, that puts a pause on everything. Every single news station, every reporter was focused on the horrific events of September 11th. And for a little bit, Spotlight's investigation into the priest was put on hold. But after the immediate coverage of 9/11 slowed down, they picked up right where they left off. Mitchell Garbedian calls Michael Resendez with big news. Quote, "There are documents that are already public, documents that could prove Cardinal Law knew. You need to go and get them now," end quote. Michael races to the courthouse and he finds them. In December of 1984, a bishop had written a letter directly to Cardinal Bernard Law. In said letter, he was warning the cardinal about assigning John Geoghegan to a church in Weston, Massachusetts for good reason. In the letter, he specifically mentioned John Geoghegan's, quote, history of involvement with young boys, end quote. Cardinal Law had received the letter. He had read it. And what did he do? He assigned John Geoghegan to the church anyway. And what did John do? He went on to essay dozens of more victims at that church. That letter was solid written proof that Cardinal Law was told about John Geoghegan's behavior and proof that he just turned a blind eye to it. By early January of 2002, the Spotlight team had spent months on their investigation, interviewing victims, analyzing documents, and connected the dots. They had found that John Geoghegan alone had essayed more than 130 children over the span of 3 decades, that at least 70 priests in Boston had also been accused of essay, that the church knew about every single one, that Cardinal Law personally approved transferring these priests from parish to parish, that the church paid secret settlements to victims in exchange for their silence, and that the pattern extended far beyond Boston. Their story was ready, and on Sunday, January 6th of 2002, the Boston Globe published their first story, Church Allowed Abuse by Priest for Years. When the Spotlight journalists arrived at their office for the first time after the story dropped, they were expecting a flood of angry people at their doors. Angry Catholics, people of the public, members of the church yelling at them, saying that they were evil, that they were lying, that they were wrong. But instead, when they got to the Globe building, there was no one there. They walked in and then the phone started ringing over and over and over again. Every single phone, they did not stop ringing for hours, for days. And the people that were calling, they were not angry. They were not accusing them of lying. They were victims. Hundreds of victims, some who had been silent for 20, 30, 40 years, all calling to say, me too. It happened to me too. The Globe publishing their first story opened up the floodgates for what was to come. By the end of January alone, the Boston Globe had published 3 more major stories. One story revealing the full extent of the church's complicity in John Geoghegan's crimes. Another story debunking the church's claims that psychiatrists had cleared the priest with history of SA to return back to work. And a third story showing exactly who was behind protecting over 70 priests. Their investigation continued throughout the remainder of 2002. Some reports state that after their first article and throughout the next couple of years, the Globe published nearly 900 articles about the scandal. The numbers just kept growing, and eventually the investigation revealed that approximately 250 priests in Boston had essayed children over decades. 250. This went beyond Boston. Other newspapers in other cities and other states started investigating their local churches, and it's shocking to say that they also found the same pattern. By the end of 2002, 1,200 priests nationwide had been accused of abuse. 5 bishops had resigned. 249 criminal cases were filed in Boston alone. And on December 13th of 2002, the most powerful man in Boston finally fell. Cardinal Law submitted his resignation to Pope John Paul II. In a brief statement, he stated, quote, "To all those who had suffered from my shortcomings and mistakes, I both apologize and from them beg forgiveness," end quote. Too little too late, my guy. But get this, Cardinal Law was never criminally charged. The Vatican did not punish him. Instead, he was sent to Rome to work at a church there. After that, he lived out his retirement very comfortably and passed away in Rome in 2017 at the age of 86. He never faced justice. John Geoghegan, the priest at the center of this entire story, was convicted in 2002. He was sentenced to 9 to 10 years in prison. On August 23rd of 2003, less than 1 year into his sentence, he was murdered in his cell by another inmate at 68 years old. 552 victims received settlements totaling close to $85 million. That settlement bankrupted several parishes and forced dozens of churches to close. But of course, we know that that can't undo decades of trauma. Many victims struggled with addiction, depression, and PTSD for the remainder of their lives. And listen to these numbers real quick globally. There were 206 locations worldwide with major SA scandals from priests against children. 5,000 alleged victims came forward nationwide in Ireland, Australia, Germany, Argentina, Canada, and dozens of more countries. And $3 billion with a B, there were $3 billion paid by the Catholic Church in U.S. settlements overall. Insane. In 2003, the Boston Globe Spotlight team won the Pulitzer Prize for Public Service, the highest honor in American journalism. But isn't it crazy to think that, one, if Marty Baron had not been hired as the editor, if he hadn't been an outsider who wasn't afraid of challenging the church, if the Spotlight team didn't exist, if they didn't want to do it, if Mitchell Garbadian hadn't finally trusted the reporter, none of this would have been exposed. Thankfully, all of those things did happen, and that group of incredible people decided that the truth mattered over power, but it's so hard to like wrap your mind around it. And like I said at the start of this video, the movie Spotlight is about this story. That movie was released in 2015. It won the Academy Award for Best Picture and Original Screenplay. Such a good movie. Go watch it. Insane. I have spent days researching this story, and I'm still so shocked that it happened. I saw the movie for the first time so many years ago. I still it's so hard for me to process in my head that this happened. 5,000 plus victims. Anyway, that is all I have for this story. Please let me know if you guys have, one, watched the movie, and two, have heard of this case, because it is literally beyond me. But I hope you guys are having the best day. If not, go do something to make it the best day. Make somebody happy, and I will see you in my next video. Massive kiss on the forehead to every single one of you.
These are some of the most notorious tragedies in history. This is the story of the Kennedy curse. Reminder, I cover a lot of dark stories on this page. Severe discretion is advised, but follow along if you want to hear more. The Kennedys are considered one of America's royal families, right up there with the likes of a Roosevelt, a Vanderbilt, or a Kardashian. And the Kennedy family are still a major influential power in politics and Hollywood. So what is the Kennedy curse? Kennedy curse refers to a string of tragic things that have followed this family through generations, like assassinations, plane crashes, overdoses, scandals, the list goes on and on. Now, this is a huge Irish Catholic family. Statistically, tragedy should happen, but people believe there may be supernatural powers here because of the frequency and the violence. So let's walk through the timeline, piece by piece, and you can decide for yourself. Is it a question of math? Or something darker. So this is part 1 of the Kennedy Curse series. Follow along if you'd like to join. Also, I'm sorry that it's another series. So who are the Kennedys? I know that RFK is making all kinds of headlines now, but the Kennedys are an enormous Irish Catholic family. The Kennedy Curse refers to one bloodline, descended from Joseph and Rose Kennedy. They built their fortune through whiskey, steel, and films before turning their power towards politics. They had 9 children, and they raised their 9 children to chase excellence and status. This was at a time when Irish Catholics were kind of outsiders and treated less than, and Joseph Kennedy Sr. was obsessed with legacy, and that pressure really shaped the family. The Kennedy family shaped modern American politics. They represented youth, charisma, and moral leadership. So, many believe the Kennedy curse starts in 1941 with Rosemary Kennedy. I made a video about this, so you can watch that if you'd like. Rosemary Kennedy was 23 when she had a botched lobotomy. It rendered her unable to walk, speak, and was institutionalized for 60 years of her life and kept secret from the public and her family. I can see why people would think that that would permanently curse a family bloodline, but that's just me. Now, 1944, 3 years later, Joe Kennedy Jr., Joe Sr.'s namesake, Joe Kennedy was the eldest of the 9 children of Joe and Rose, dies in an airplane crash. He was killed in action during World War II at 29 years old. 1 month later, in 1944, William Cavendish was the newlywed husband of Kathleen Kennedy, and he was fatally shot by a German sniper. Then in 1948, Kathleen Kennedy has the same horrific fate as her husband and dies in a plane crash. Kathleen Kennedy, who was referred to as Kik, was flying from Paris to the French Riviera when her private plane crashed. The crash was apparently caused by severe turbulence and a violent storm. Kik was only 28 years old at the time of the crash, and we are going to talk more about what happens in the next decade in part 2. I will see you there. This is the story of the Kennedy curse, part 2. So to recap, 2 of the 9 Kennedy children have died tragically from plane crashes, and 1 has suffered a botched lobotomy. And that brings us to 1956, when Arabella Kennedy, daughter to JFK, died at birth. She was the eldest of the Kennedys and was tragically stillborn. Which brings us to 1963. Patrick Bouvier Kennedy, son of JFK, died of infant respiratory distress syndrome. Probably the most famous events ascribed to the Kennedy curse, which is the assassination of John F. Kennedy. And that brings us to 1963. John F. Kennedy was assassinated in Dallas, Texas on November 22nd, 1963. According to official reports, JFK was shot by former U.S. Marine Lee Harvey Oswald while riding in a presidential motorcade. The president was driven to the nearest hospital where he was pronounced dead on arrival. He was 46 years old. 1 year later, June 19, 1964, Ted Kennedy survives a plane crash. And this is where the Kennedy curse was uttered into existence. Because following the crash, Ted Kennedy whispered, "Someone up there doesn't like us." And honestly, I can see why he'd say that. So the plane was on its way to a Democratic convention, and the plane crashed over an apple orchard in Massachusetts. Ted Kennedy was pulled from the wreckage by a passenger and fellow senator. Ted Kennedy spent 5 months in the hospital recovering from a broken back, a punctured lung, and internal bleeding. So 5 years after JFK was assassinated, Robert F. Kennedy is assassinated. He was the OG RFK, and he was also referred to as Bobby. After his brother's political assassination, Robert F. Kennedy became the lead contender for the President of the United States. Bobby Kennedy and John Kennedy were incredibly close. He was a prominent member of the Democratic Party, a former senator, and the Attorney General, and is often lauded as an icon of modern American liberalism. So, right after winning the California primary in 1968 presidential election, RFK was shot after his victory speech in the Ambassador Hotel in Los Angeles. Bobby Kennedy was 42 years old, which brings us to July 1969. This is Ted Kennedy's Chappaquiddick incident. This was a very strange thing, and many believe that this was the reason why Ted Kennedy never became president. So Ted Kennedy is driving with a woman named Mary Jo Kopechne, who was a 28-year-old former campaign worker for his older brother, Bobby Kennedy. And the story is very murky, but Ted Kennedy winds up driving his car off a bridge. The car overturns and winds up in a pond, and this happens right after midnight. So Ted Kennedy was able to swim free from the car. He maintains that he tried and failed to rescue Mary Jo from the vehicle that was trapped underwater. He didn't report the incident until 10 hours after it had happened. He was a senator at the time, and the implications were enormous. A few days after the incident, Ted Kennedy pled guilty to a charge of leaving the scene of an accident and received a 2-month suspended jail sentence. Some claimed that Ted Kennedy had been operating the vehicle negligently. He maintained that his car skidded off the narrow bridge. As a result of the incident, Ted Kennedy decided not to run for president in 1972 and 1976. He maintained that his relationship with Mary Jo Kopechne was strictly professional, denying any kind of romantic feelings. But we'll really never know because so much of the Chappaquiddick incident remains a mystery. What everybody can agree on was that Mary Jo Kopechne was a smart political professional with a bright future ahead, which was senselessly cut short. Ted Kennedy did run for office in 1980, but lost the nomination to Jimmy Carter. And I will see you in part 3, where we are going to look at the Kennedy curse in the 1970s.
We could know those things.
Want to get creeped out? Let's talk about the Yule cat, also known as the Jólakaturinn, which I will only be saying that one time. This is one of Iceland's most feared Christmas folklore creatures. It is described as a black cat the size of a house, which adorable, I love it. Allegedly, this cat roams the Icelandic countryside on Christmas Eve. It attacks and nom-noms any children who do not wear at least one piece of new clothing. So basically, if children behave well, they should be getting new clothing for Christmas. If they misbehave, they're not getting any new clothing and the cat's gonna eat them. A horrific and ghastly punishment, because new clothing is the only protection from the Yule cat. Now, this cat is said to be the pet of Gria, a terrifying story, scarier than Krampus, so I'll get into that in the next video. The Yule cat is known for hating mice, hunting people, and bringing immediate fear when its meow is heard. The Yule cat is similar to the cat She from older Celtic legends. The cat She was said to trap human souls during their transition to the afterlife. The cat She is also described as a witch in animal form. I love witches though. Let's stop demonizing witches. But our fear of witches is kind of where this whole fear or superstition of black cats came from. It was believed that witches could turn into black cats, and then at night they would prowl and hide in the shadows. By the Middle Ages, cats were very much associated with paganism, witchcraft, and the devil. The Yule cat also encouraged people to work harder so that they could afford new clothing, and it motivated productivity during long, cold, hard winters. Let's talk about Gurria.
Kids who remember their past lives. In 2002, Talia was born. She began talking quite early. She was toilet trained pretty early. In fact, a parent said she was very advanced. One of Talia's biggest personality traits was that she loved to look after people. If somebody hurt themselves, Talia would come running to look after them. Her parents said it became a little bit of an obsession. Talia carried around a little backpack and she would put things in there like plasters and cotton wool. One night her father was on the patio just sweeping when he noticed that Talia was sort of looking into space. He said, "Daddy, do you remember when we used to be Japanese?" To which of course he said, "No." By the way, if you like these types of stories, please hit the like and repost. It really helps this page and allows me to make more videos just like this. Anyway, she said to her dad, "I've been thinking about the little girl that died." And he said, "What little girl?" She said, "Daddy, do you not remember? She worked really hard, but then she got sick and I tried to look after her, but she died." A little bit of time had passed and nothing had really happened until one day her father was in his office painting. Talia came in and she said, "Can I paint too?" And he said, "Of course you can." So he gave her a paintbrush and he gave her some old newspapers. He came to look at what she was doing and he could not believe his eyes. She was actually drawing in Japanese. She was writing Japanese writing. She was drawing symbols. Also to note, she was only 4 years old. He didn't say anything to Talia, but later that night he began researching them symbols to try and find out what she'd wrote. Talia had actually spelt the words in Japanese, love and home. But this was just the start. Talia began writing and drawing in Japanese a lot. She drew her father a picture and it was a Japanese symbol, and she said to him, "Do you remember when I told you we used to be Japanese?" And he said, "Yeah." She said, "Well, this was it." She told her dad family details, family names. She said that she worked in a place where she looked after people, young people and even old people, but there was only so much she could do because buildings were falling down. She told him that she was giving medicine to people and she was trying to save them. The details that she was piling on her father were incredible, so much so that he decided to reach out to a Japanese expert and then fly out to LA to meet her. She had gathered everything that the father had delivered to her, everything that Talia had said. She then presented Talia with some information. Everything that Talia had said basically had linked to a group of nurses who were allocated in a specific part of Japan to look after people after the atom bomb. In fact, everything that Talia had said and drawn pointed exactly to this group of people. She then presented it to Talia, who pretty much confirmed it. In fact, Talia got quite upset. Even one of the symbols which Talia had drawn represented the holly tree, which is something that is sacred in Japan. But it was also a symbol of where these nurses were deployed. Was this proof of reincarnation, or is there another explanation?
I can't get those screams out of my head, and if you've seen the phone camera footage, you know exactly what I'm talking about. He murdered her at school in front of the entire class. It was October 2024 in Caranavi in Bolivia. It was supposed to be just another autumnal school day. Camila Picassi Zanga was a beautiful and intelligent single mum to a 5-year-old boy. She was incredibly hardworking, juggling not only mum life on her own, but also studying really hard. She wanted to become a teacher. She was very ambitious and knew that she wanted to give her son a better life. But it was here that she would tragically cross paths with a guy called Edwin Huanca. Now, he was totally infatuated and obsessed with her, but she had absolutely no interest in him whatsoever. She was simply there to study, do her classes, and get home to her son. Call me crazy, but I feel like a woman should be allowed to do that. But he was not willing to take no for an answer. He was constantly getting more and more aggressive and desperate in his pursuit of her. This wasn't just like asking her out. He would get right up in her face and grab her arms. This was not something she could just ignore, and it seemed like everybody around her in the classroom classroom knew this was going on. She actually, bless her, thought maybe I should just quit to avoid this guy. And I don't know about you guys, but it makes me so angry when something like this is just going on in front of people and nothing's done about it. Like, why wasn't he kicked out of school? But some people said that the teachers were even intimidated by him too, because he'd apparently even attacked a teacher. But things were about to get darker than anyone could ever have imagined. Suddenly, out of nowhere, in the middle of the class, Edwin just launched at her. He pulled out a knife and viciously started attacking her in front of screaming students. And these were absolute blood-curdling screams. I don't know whether you guys have seen the video, but it truly was harrowing. Now, students started swarming out of the classroom, obviously to try and save themselves in a panic. Some of them tried to throw things at him to try and get him off her, but there was no getting him off. He was absolutely determined. Once the nightmare was over, all that remained was scattered bags and books all over the classroom and her dead body lying on the floor. Police raced over to the scene, but it was far too late to save her. She had 39 stab wounds all over her body. Obviously, everybody was absolutely outraged that this had been allowed to happen, and just also how commonly this was happening in South America. He tried to say that he did what he did out of revenge. What do you mean revenge? Revenge that she didn't find you attractive. He was ultimately given life in prison, and Camila's son got a different kind of life sentence. An entire life without a mum.
You can't make this stuff up. Might have known the story of real-life boogeyman.
In June of 2015, 45-year-old James Young landed his dream job. For the last several years, James had been a 5th grade teacher in East Canton, Ohio, teaching special education. And while he loved his job and he loved the kids he worked with, he had always had his eye on becoming a guidance counselor for high school students. In 1988, James had actually graduated from East Canton, Ohio High School, and ever since his graduation, he had wanted to come back to the school and help the next generation of East Canton students prepare for their lives as adults. And a guidance counselor was designed to do just that. James had applied for the job before, but every time he applied, they would tell him that while he was qualified, there just wasn't a spot open for him. However, at the end of that school year, he was told a guidance counselor spot had opened up at the high school and the job was his if he wanted it. And so, of course, James said, yes, I'll take the job. And immediately he told his mother about this amazing news. And his mother, who lived only a block away from him in East Canton, Ohio, would say that her son was so ecstatic about the job that normally when summer break was coming up, he would really look forward to that time off from school. But now that he had this new job to look forward to, he was already anxious for the summer to be over. James was a single man, but he was not lonely. He had a number of very close, lifelong friends that he would spend virtually all of his off time with. And that summer, he did just that. He went out with his friends, they explored all of Ohio and outside surrounding areas, they spent a lot of time outside, and they enjoyed each other's company. Towards the end of the summer, James and his friends knew it was time to schedule their annual trip to Cedar Point. Cedar Point is an amusement park about 2 hours northwest of East Canton, Ohio. It's situated right on the shores of Lake Erie, and it's known for its incredible roller coasters, of which they had 17, making them the park with the second most roller coasters in the world. Every summer, since James could remember, he and his very close friends would make a trip out to Cedar Point, usually at the end of the summer, to kind of cap off their vacation. After looking at their calendar, they decided that the best day to go would be Thursday, August 13th. This would give the group of friends one more fun thing to do before the following week James started his new job. So on the morning of that Thursday, the friends piled into a car and they made the 2-hour commute up to Cedar Point. And as soon as they got there, they went inside, they grabbed a map, and they began systematically hitting as many rides as they possibly could. And so by 4:30 p.m., they were totally exhausted. They'd been on virtually every ride. And so they were about to call it a day when James and his friends decide, hey, let's go on one more ride before we pack it in. And so they pull out their map and they're looking, and they realize they haven't gone on one of their favorite rides. It was called the Raptor. The Raptor was not Cedar Point's biggest roller coaster, but it was their fastest. It would reach a top speed of 57 miles per hour. Passengers are seated 4 across with their feet dangling below them in these suspended chairs with the big harness that comes down. And then once the ride starts, they're brought slowly up this 137-foot hill, and then at the top they pause before being dropped down into this nearly 4,000-foot long track that spins them upside down 6 different times. So James and his friends, they closed up their map and they ran their way over to the Raptor. They got in line, and by 4:50 p.m., they had made it to the front of the line. They got into their seats, their harness came down, and then the ride started. And they were pulled up to the top of the hill, they paused, and then they were launched down the track, and for 2 minutes they zipped and zagged and looped-de-looped all through this track, and then it was just suddenly over. And the friends had a great great time on the ride. Except James realized about halfway through the ride, when they were upside down, his phone and wallet had come out of his pockets, and he actually saw them fall down towards the ground. And although he didn't see exactly where they landed, he had a pretty good idea of where they were. And so after they got off the ride, the friends were kind of talking about how much fun it was, and James said to them, "Hey, I lost my cell phone and wallet. Will you guys come with me while I go look for them?" And so the friends agreed. They left the Raptor station and they walked down the paved path until they were in front of this fence that said no trespassing. And so James gets up to the fence and he's looking inside of this fenced-in area, and he sees right in the middle of this restricted area is his phone and his wallet. And before James's friends could tell him not to do this, he had climbed over the fence and entered into this restricted area. He ran over to his phone and his wallet, he picked it up, and then when he stood back up again, the next wave of Raptor riders came blazing through the area, and the underside, the steel underside of the ride, hit James right in the back of the head. He never saw it coming. It threw him forward, he landed on his face, and immediately the park officials saw this happen. They stopped the ride, but the riders on board the Raptor, they didn't know what was going on, and so they're stopped on the ride. They're looking down, and they hear people screaming, and they look down, and they see there's this man, James, lying face down on the ground with blood pooling around his head. The fence James had climbed over was there specifically to keep visitors from getting too close to this one low point in the Raptor ride where the ride can come through and it can hit you. And so medical workers, they rush over, they hop over the fence, they get to James, but it was too late. He was pronounced dead at the scene. That day, Cedar Park was put under investigation for James's death, but after reviewing the footage and talking to witnesses, the investigation was closed and they determined that the park was not at fault. James, despite being a very intelligent and sensible man, had a brief lapse in judgment, and it unfortunately cost him his life. Today, Cedar Park is still open for business and the Raptor ride is still operational. Around midnight on September 3rd, 1986, Doug Wells and his wife Kristen were pulling onto their street in western Montana when they noticed a camper parked in front of their house. Neither of them recognized the camper, and so when they pulled into their driveway, Doug got out and walked over and looked inside to see if anyone was in there. And there was a man sleeping in the front seat. Doug didn't wake him up. Instead, he went back to his wife. They talked about it, and they decided that this man must have just randomly parked in front of their house, and that most likely the next day he would leave. And so the couple went inside their house, and they began getting ready for bed. At some point, Doug rounded up all the trash inside of the house and was going to bring it outside to put into the trash bin. And when he went outside, standing in his front lawn is the same guy who was just sleeping inside of the camper. And so Doug very cautiously goes down the front steps, and he yells out to this guy and says, "What are you doing here?" And immediately the man put his hands up and said he meant no harm. He said his name was Wayne Nance, and he actually worked with Doug's wife, Kristen, at the furniture store in town. Wayne went on to say that he happened to be driving down their street earlier that day, and he spotted someone standing outside one of their windows looking in their house, and he knew it was Kristen's house, and he looked in their driveway, and he saw that Kristen wasn't home, and it looked like nobody was home, and so he decided he would just park out front and try to scare off this person and wait for Kristen to get back. But by the time Kristen got back, he had fallen asleep. Doug was totally caught off guard by this whole situation, the idea that there's this guy on his property talking about another guy that was lurking around his property. And so he asked Wayne, did you see this guy again after that first time you saw him? And Wayne said no, he hadn't, but he didn't have a flashlight. And so maybe if Doug went in the house and got some flashlights, the two of them could walk the property and make sure nobody was there. Doug thanked him for the offer and said, "Okay, well, why don't you come in the house and I'll go look for those flashlights." And so Doug led the way inside of his house, and as soon as Wayne got in the house and shut the front door behind him, he pulled out a metal pipe he was hiding and smashed Doug over the back of the head. Doug turned around and Wayne hit him again over the face, and before long the two of them were struggling on the ground. Kristen, who was upstairs, heard the commotion, and she came running down the stairs, and she sees at the bottom her husband, who's bleeding profusely from his head. He's covering himself up on the ground, while Wayne, her co-worker, is standing over him, punching and kicking him. Before Kristen could do anything, Wayne noticed her up on the stairs, and he drew a pistol and aimed it at her and told her to come down here and tie up your husband's arms and legs. Kristen, who's in shock, is just hoping this was just a robbery and that they would have their lives spared. And so she does as she's told. She walks down, Wayne throws her some cord, she ties up her husband's arms and legs, and then afterwards Wayne leads Kristen back upstairs to the bedroom where he ties her up as well. After that, Wayne went back down to the main floor where Doug was still laying on the ground, and he grabbed Doug by the legs and he pulled him down the flight of stairs to the basement where he tied him up to a pole, and then he savagely beat him with the pipe before Wayne pulled out an 8-inch blade and plunged it directly into Doug's chest all the way in. And then when he pulled it out again, Doug slumped over. Wayne went back upstairs all the way to the second floor to check on Kristen, and he saw she had managed to get partially out of her restraints, and she was reaching for the landline, and so he jumped on top of her and managed to restrain her all over again. And then after he was confident in her restraints, he went back downstairs to make sure Doug was dead. When he got down there, he saw Doug was still slouched over in the same position he had left him, and so Wayne assumed Doug must be dead, and Wayne went back upstairs to assault Kristen. But Wayne was wrong. Doug wasn't dead. And after Wayne went upstairs that second time, Doug, despite his horrific head and chest injuries, managed to wriggle out of his restraints and then hobbled over to a workbench where he had a rifle laying out because Doug was actually a gunsmith. And so he took the rifle and he loaded it with the one round he found on the table. And then he walked over to the base of the stairs, he raised his rifle, and he made his way up to the main floor. He didn't come in contact with Wayne, and he looked around the first floor, he didn't see him, and he heard his wife screaming upstairs. And so he made his way to the next set of stairs and began walking up with his rifle raised. At the top of the stairs to the second floor, there was a hallway that ran right and left out of sight. And so as Doug is making his way up, he can hear off to the left, out of view, his wife screaming in the bedroom, and he can hear the sound of very heavy footsteps running down the hall towards the landing where he is. And so Doug positioned himself in the stairwell, he took aim about chest height with his rifle, and he waited for their attacker to show himself. And so as soon as Wayne came flying around the corner with his knife in his hand, Doug just fired one shot that struck him right in the stomach. Wayne fell backwards, totally shocked at what had just happened. He began to stagger, and Doug, meanwhile, turned his rifle around like a baseball bat because he didn't have any more rounds, and he just starts walking down the hall, smashing Wayne as Wayne continues to stumble and fall and try to run away from Doug. And finally, he gets away from Doug, charges into the bedroom where Kristen is, and he grabs his pistol, and he turns around and he fires 3 shots towards the door where Doug is now standing. And Doug, he's unfazed. One round hits him in the leg, the other 2 miss. He doesn't care. He just walks up to Wayne and begins bashing his head in with the back of this rifle. He hits him so many times that the buttstock of the rifle explodes and the metal of the rifle bends like an L. And at some point, Wayne drops the gun because he's getting viciously beaten on by Doug and his rifle. And Doug sees that, he grabs the pistol, and he fires the remaining rounds into Wayne's head. Police and paramedics would show up shortly thereafter, and Doug, Kristen, and their attacker Wayne were all rushed to the hospital. Doug and Kristen would make full recoveries. As for Wayne, he would die the following day from his injuries. After the incident, the police investigated Wayne Nance to see who this guy was, and they discovered that almost certainly he had been a serial killer that was connected to at least 6 cold case murders from 1974 to 1986. But because Wayne never confessed to any of these murders before he died, the true number of people he killed is still unknown. On February 24th, 2019, a woman arrived at a ceramics factory in Hubei province in China. She walked through the front door into the main office where she saw a desk attendant. She informed them she was a quality control inspector and she was there that day to inspect their vehicles. The attendant was accustomed to their company being periodically inspected, and so she asked the woman if she needed any help, and the woman said, "Nope, I'm just going to roam around your building, check what I need to check, and then I'll be out of here." And so the attendant told her that was totally fine, and if she needed anything, just come back and she would help her. And so the inspector thanked her and then turned around and went out the front door and checked the vehicles in the front lot of the ceramics factory. And then after she was done, she went back into the main office, she walked past the attendant and out the back door into the very active yard where all day long these huge bulldozers would move around thousands of pounds of sand. And so the inspector walked out that back door and she scanned the yard and she saw there were 2 bulldozers doing just that, moving all around. And then off to the left side, there was a dump truck that seemed to be stationary. And so very confidently, she just walked right into the yard and made her way over to that dump truck. And then when she got there, she flagged the driver down and said she was an inspector and that she was going to check the vehicle out. And so the driver helped her by turning on and off signals and moving back and forth. And then at some point, the inspector needed the dump truck driver to back up a significant distance. She needed to watch him do that. And so she, the inspector, backed away from the dump truck until she was in the middle of the yard, standing right in front of this parked bulldozer. What happens next is all caught on video. And so as she's standing there and she's watching the dump truck back up right in front of her, the bulldozer driver right behind her turns on the machine and immediately lurches forward. Now, the driver of this bulldozer did not see the woman, and she was in his blind spot right in front of the bucket of his bulldozer. And he was not aware there was somebody on foot walking around the yard. It's an extremely dangerous place to be on foot. And so he goes right into her and he knocks her backwards. She falls into the bucket. She starts screaming, but no one can hear her. It's so loud. And the driver drives the bucket directly into a pile of sand and scoops up thousands of pounds of sand that come down directly on this woman. So now she's completely buried alive and being crushed by all this sand. And then the driver, completely oblivious, lifts the bucket up, turns around and drives across the yard and dumps the sand and the woman into a vibrating sand crusher. The vibrating sand crusher is exactly what it sounds like. It pulverizes bits of rock and stone and grinds them down into a very fine powder. The machines come in various shapes and sizes, but this one inside of this ceramics factory was a top-loaded version, and it basically looked like a big dumpster with this big opening at the top. And so these bulldozer drivers would take these clumps of sand and they would dump it in this opening at the top of this bin, and then once they dumped their sand into the opening, the machine would vibrate, causing the sand to filter its way down towards the bottom of the machine, where there were these big, vicious metal claws that constantly smashed together and would just completely obliterate anything that passed through them. In the video, when the driver dumps his bucket load into the sand crusher, you can actually see the woman falling in, but then she immediately jumps into action and begins trying to pull herself up and out of this pile. And at some point, she gets most of her upper body out, and she waves, and she gets the attention of the driver who's just dumped her into the sand crusher. And the driver, he stops right away. You can see the vehicle lurch to a stop. He leaps out and he starts running over to the sand crusher. But as he's running over, this woman who's waving and waving, at some point her leg or some other part of her gets grabbed by those jaws at the bottom of the machine, and she's pulled slowly down into the sand crusher and disappears under the sand. When this happens, the driver is frantic and he's screaming for other people in the factory to come over and help. And at some point, the others inside, they realize there's an emergency and they all run over. But when they realize what's happened, that someone has fallen into the sand crusher, they all just stop and stand there because they know there's nothing they can do. The woman was gone.
This ransom call sent shivers down me spine. Have a listen.
$10,000 might be a lot of bread, but your daughter's life is the buttered topping.
I'm True Crime Caitlin, and this is the disappearance of Margaret Ellen Fox. Margaret was born on the 4th of February 1960 into a big happy family in Burlington, New Jersey. The family were all extremely close, and the siblings would describe each other as being best friends. Margaret was the only daughter, and she was really into playing the piano and horse riding. In June 1974, she had just graduated from her Year 8 class at a Burlington grammar school. Margaret was now 14 years old, and she started to want to become more independent. She started to really develop interests in makeup, fashion, clothes and beauty, and so she decided to get a summer job so that she could buy all of those things for herself. Margaret and her cousin Lynn put an ad into a local Burlington newspaper where they were advertising babysitting services, and soon they got their first job offer. The number that was listed on the ad was for Lynn's home phone, and she got a phone call from a man introducing himself as John Marshall. He was looking for a babysitter for his 5-year-old child to come to his home in nearby Mount Holly, that is around about 7 miles from Burlington. He was offering a really good wage at $40 for 4 hours once a week. The babysitter would get full access to his family pool, again a really good wage, and he even offered to cover their bus fares. Lynn's parents though weren't really comfortable with this. Lynn was still really young. She was only 11, and they just weren't comfortable with putting her on a bus to go and meet a man that they had never met. It would have been different if this was like a family friend or something. Lynn would give John Margaret's details, and when he called her, she gladly accepted the offer with her parents' permission. Margaret awoke bright and early on the 24th of June 1974, excitedly getting ready for her first day at this new babysitting job. She would pack a small bag, taking her swimming costume and her glasses case with her. Her younger brother Joe would walk her to the bus stop, and she got on the bus at around about 8:40 a.m. John had given her very detailed instructions on which bus to get, where to get it to, at what time and what stop she needed to get off at. Once she got off the bus on the other side, him and his wife would be waiting for her in their red VW Beetle. Margaret's mum asked her to ring her when she got to John's house just so she knew that she got there safely. However, the call never came. Now, initially, Margaret's mum tried not to worry. She thought that maybe Margaret had got distracted, she was busy, or she had simply forgotten. However, by the time 2:30 p.m. rolled around and Margaret didn't return home like she was supposed to, that is when she started to feel concerned. Margaret had left a phone number behind for John's house for her mum to ring her if she needed her, and so her mum picked up the phone and started dialing this number, ringing it and ringing it and ringing it until someone on the other end finally answered. The person who answered was a woman, and she told Margaret's mum that no one by the name of Margaret was there, which was confusing. After this woman hung up, her mum continued ringing and ringing the phone until a man picked up and told Margaret's mum that she wasn't calling a house phone, she was calling a payphone. She had been given a false number. Margaret's dad would drive up to Mount Holly and started just driving around it, hoping that he would see his daughter somewhere, but when he didn't, he returned back home and reported her missing to the police. Officers began their investigation, and they confirmed that Margaret had got on the bus and she had got off at the stop that she was instructed to. She was then seen talking to a man in a reddish colour car, and then that's it. There are no more sightings sightings of her. The police were able to track down which payphone the calls were made from, and they confirmed that it was a payphone outside of a shop. The manager of the shop that the phone is outside of just so happened to be named John Marshall. This man was very briefly looked into, however he was quickly ruled out because the detective on this case was his friend and he was sure that he wasn't involved. Once Margaret's case hit the news, along with the circumstances that she disappeared, other women began coming forward telling the investigators that their daughter had also been offered fake babysitting jobs by this same man. But none of these women let their daughters go because they weren't comfortable with letting their daughters go to meet a random man. This John Marshall was very adamant that the young girls must travel by bus and alone. This proved that whoever this John was, he had premeditated. He had planned exactly what he was going to do. He knew how to lure these young girls and he was just going to keep trying until he managed to deceive someone. And Margaret just so happened to be the young girl that fell for his trap. The phone inside of the Fox household would ring one day, and the man on the other side said that he had Margaret and was demanding a $10,000 ransom in exchange for her safe return. This is an eerie portion of that ransom call.
$10,000 might be a lot of bread, but your daughter's life is the buttered topping.
Like, what the fuck is that? The next day, the parents would receive a letter from this alleged abductor who gave details on how the ransom exchange was going to take place, along with some details that no one else should have known, including what Margaret was wearing and something very specific about the glasses case she was carrying with her. That should have been enough to prove that this man was legit. However, just the day before the parents received this letter, those details were put out in the news. So they had no way of knowing if this man was legit. Had he just seen the details in the news and then wrote the letter straight away and sent it? We don't know. Nevertheless, not wanting to take any chances and desperate to have their baby girl back, Margaret's parents withdrew the money and were awaiting the rest of the ransom demands when they received one final letter from the alleged kidnapper saying that the deal was off. And that is where this case stands. Margaret Ellen Fox disappeared over 51 years ago, and we have no idea where she is, what happened to her, and who was responsible.
He was abducted in broad daylight. How did nobody see it happen? Hello, true crimers. This is the case of Jared Ross. Viewer discretion is advised. Jared Ross was born in November of 1985. I believe he was born in Scotland. He had numerous siblings who he grew very close with. Jared was described as a really silly kid, very funny, had a lot of energy. He was also really intelligent for his young age. At the time this case occurs, he is 11 years old. His family had moved to the Newman area in Western Australia. But when this case occurred, the family was on holiday in Rockingham. One day, Jared and one of his siblings were pretty bored, and so the mom suggested, maybe you can walk down the street to the comic book store at the shopping center. This is actually from a recreation the news would do to see if it could help jog anyone's memory. But this would have been Jared, and behind him was his brother who was on rollerblades. The brother would pass by him and say, "Hey, I'll meet you at the shop." And so Jared at that point was walking on his own. But he never got to the comic book store. He never made it. This is in the middle of the afternoon. It's a bright, sunny day. His brother would realize that he hasn't gotten there yet. And then he goes to inform the parents, and they can't find him. So they report him missing. So Jared was last seen walking down Kent Street. And that's where the police now believe he was abducted from. Somebody snatched this kid off the streets. The search for the 11-year-old boy was big. It was very thorough. They were looking every possible place that you could look. They were pleading on television, if you have him, please return him safely. Meanwhile, they're really not getting any information from anyone. Nobody seemed to see what exactly happened to him. If he was abducted, nobody witnessed it. Nobody heard it, supposedly. But unfortunately, he would not be missing for much longer. About 113 kilometers north of where he was last seen, I guess it's called the Old Pine Plantation now, but I think then it was called the Carnup Pine Plantation. The body of a young boy was discovered, and they haven't exactly released what the cause of death was, but they have said with certainty that this was a homicide, that this little boy was murdered. And the body would sadly soon be identified as 11-year-old Jared Ross. He was in this shirt and these shorts. They were on him when he was found. But one piece of clothing, a very distinct piece of clothing that he was wearing that day but has not been found, is a hat. He was wearing a New York Yankees hat. This is obviously not the exact one because they haven't found it, but this is an identical hat that he was wearing. Just interesting that it wasn't found with his body. It could have fallen off when he was maybe pulled into a car, but you'd think they would find the hat around the area where he may have been taken from, but it wasn't found. Was it kept as some kind of trophy? The police will end up doing from what I understand, a pretty thorough investigation. They were going door to door, searching people's homes, did a very large forensic examination of the entire area where his body was found. I guess there were dog hairs on the boy's body, but it wasn't a dog that belonged to the family because I don't think they had a dog with them. What was the motive? He had money in his pocket, which was still in his pocket, so it wasn't robbery. Why would you rob a kid anyway? That seems weird. All I know is that they haven't announced for sure if he was sexually assaulted, but it also doesn't sound like they can rule that possibility out. So it could have been a sexually motivated crime. The police have also stated at one point that it was a crime of opportunity. I just don't know in what capacity they mean. On April 20th, 1998, this is now several months after he is found murdered, a woman comes forward to state that on that day in question, she believes she saw two men struggling with a young boy, and they were trying to get him into a brown station wagon. Both men appeared to be in their mid-30s. She told police that she didn't do anything about it because she wasn't comfortable intervening. I understand not approaching the situation because that could lead to more harm, but I'm wondering why it took her that long to come forward about the story afterwards. Like, why not report what you just saw immediately to someone? As recently as about 2020 or so, the police have stated that they have identified new persons of interest, not suspects per se, but they haven't released or announced who those people might be. They are, though, still very actively working on this case and are determined to get it solved. There is a $100,000 reward for information that helps lead to the capture of his killer or killers. Someone somewhere out there knows the truth about who killed this 11-year-old boy. Perhaps that someone is you. If you have any information on the murder of Jared Ross, please call 1-800-333-000. That's obviously an Australian number. My understanding, you can report information anonymously. If you know something, it is time to come forward and say something. She said she shot him accidentally 4 times. Whoopsies. Now, hello, true crimers. This is the case of Herman Tarnauer. Viewer discretion is advised. Herman Tarnauer was born in Brooklyn, New York in 1910. He would go on to attend Syracuse University, where he would get his MD. And then he would join the U.S. Army Medical Corps, where he was serving during World War II. After the war, when he came back, he would start the Scarsdale Medical Center in New York. Eventually, he became known as the Diet Doctor. Would then go on to write a very popular diet book called The Scarsdale Medical Diet. In this case occurred, he was a clinical professor at the New York Medical College. Starting in 1966, he was in a relationship with this woman here, Jean Harris. Relationship with Dr. Tarnauer was, kind of strange. He apparently was not hell-bent on being necessarily faithful. He encouraged her, it's okay for you to see other men while we're together. And he was like, I can also see other women. In 1979, she found out he was having an affair with his secretary named Lynn. Lynn was significantly younger than both of them. And Jean wasn't too thrilled with that. This would create a strain in their relationship. It was at this time where his book, because it was written around this time, that it became very popular, and he was going on book tours. And instead of taking Jean, he took the younger woman on the tour with him. Understandably, that infuriated Jean. And by the way, at this time, Jean herself is the headmistress at the Madera School in Virginia. On March 10th, 1980, this relationship came to a deadly end. Jean was working at the school that day. When she got off, she would drive to Dr. Tarnauer's home in Purchase, New York. And in her purse, a .32 caliber pistol. According to Jean, her plan was to have a conversation with Dr. Tarnauer, and then she was going to put the gun to her own head and pull the trigger. But that's not what ended up happening. When she got to his home, she noticed lingerie that definitely was not hers. This led to a loud argument between the two of them, where, according to Jean, he told her, quote, "Jesus, Jean, you're crazy. Get out of here." Then she says when she put the gun to her head, he intervened by knocking it out of her hand or lifting her hand up. But when she did so, the gun went off and it shot him through his hand. Then he wrestled with her with the gun in her hand. And it goes off again. Then it goes off again. And it goes off again. She accidentally fired 3 more rounds into Herman Tarnauer. The first one going through his hand, the rest fatally through his body. I don't know if I've ever heard of someone firing a gun at close range at someone accidentally 4 times. That's the story she went with. She did not go there with the intent on killing him, even though that's what ended up happening. He died. She tells police this wild story about everything, about how this was her plan to end her own life in front of him. Problem police had is they had 0 evidence that she had planned to go to that house to murder him. One could say, though, she brought a gun inside the house, meaning there was some intent to use that gun for potentially lethal purposes. But they couldn't prove that she wasn't telling the truth in terms of planning to do it to herself and not him. Personally, when I hear the story and I read about it, I don't believe she went there with the intention of murdering him. And certainly there was no proof to show that that was her intent. But she did end up killing him. The question became, though, was it truly an accident, or was it a heat of passion in the moment she decided to take that gun she brought and shoot him? Intentionally, just not planned. She was arrested and charged with the murder of Herman Tarnauer. Herman Tarnauer's reputation would be kind of dragged during the trial. I mean, he was not exactly the most faithful guy. There was also plenty of testimony and evidence that Jean was already well aware of how unfaithful he was and how he was vocal about it to her prior. She was with him still for 14 years. The jury, however, was not buying her story of the accidental gunshots. Sure, 1 shot through his hand, yeah, you can believe that. But 3 more times at point-blank range, not so believable. She was found guilty of second-degree murder and sentenced to a short prison sentence of just 15 years. She was convicted in 1981. In 1992, she was granted clemency, and by 1993, she was completely paroled. And she went about her life. Just 2 days before Christmas 2012, December 23rd, at 89 years old, Jean Harris dies. And the story of the ladies' man diet doctor and the jealous lover came to an end.
Link in bio and I'll check them out.